11 o'clock, welcome in. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, West Metro, Chris Clark along with you on this Thursday. Of course, Wes and I were just recapping there at the end of that last hour, the conversation that he had with Luke Doty for today's edition of the Garnet Trust Hour. And, of course, Luke Doty going to be part of SEC Media Days alongside Boogie Huntley and Debo Williams coming up on Monday as they are the player representatives for South Carolina. And as Wes mentioned at the end of that last hour, a couple things that Doty noted on they wanted to dive into a little bit more, particularly when he talked about the offensive line as well as what he's seen out of Lenore Sellers so far this year.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. And so, Chris, basically, we've been, I feel like, gathering little, like every interview we say, what do you think of Lenore Sellers? Most of the time, we kind of get the things we already knew. But then we've been gathering little data points along the way. And I thought Luke had one of the best data points we've gotten yet because, again, we already know this dude is big, strong, physical, can launch the football, is highly competitive, all those things. But Luke pointed out that he also has this gift of recall as far as, he was just talking about how intelligent he is, how smart he is, but he went as far as giving us some detail in that he's one of these guys that can be like, oh, I've seen that look or that play before. We ran that last year against North Carolina, for example. Mm-hmm. Like, just picks it up, and Luke went as far as saying sometimes this is stuff that was just like game plan specific for that week. So we're not even talking about kind of your broad
like base
playbook.
Plays, yeah.
Yeah. And that he just can sit there and basically instantly see, recognize, recall. And, you know, I think for a young quarterback who we all already know he has the tools, the upside to be successful, when you hear little things like that, I think we're just adding to the evidence. Like, we're just building this puzzle that tells us, this kid has a chance to be special. Like, what more do we need to see or hear other than to just see him go do it as the guy on that stage?
Yeah, it just has to translate to the field. I was thinking about this the other day. After talking to Case and Henry, who also, like everyone else, kind of lavished praise on the Norris, and so many people that we've talked to, whether it's been public conversations or just like some private behind-the-scenes conversations with some sources, I almost get the feel that some of those people are like sandbagging a little bit, like they don't want to go too far, because they realize how that may sound. It's almost casual. I mean, people would just be like, yeah, I mean, he could be special. Hey, who looked good this spring? Lenoris. It's just like kind of very low key. It's not this over the top, like, oh my God, like I've never seen anything, but it's just consistent and everybody's just so impressed with him. But those are interesting comments. Do y'all think he could do the, like the Sean McVay type of thing?
Where
like hey, what did y'all run on 2nd and 4 in the first quarter?
Possible.
That's a good idea. We should do that.
There's some Steve Spurrier. You always heard he could just from 40 years ago tell you things about a play, which is insane to me.
Well, and that's something that we've known about Lenore Sellers basically from the jump, even from his time in high school being recorded, is like he's a smart kid. And again, we've sat down with him in here on a couple of occasions, and we obviously see that resonate. And, just in talking to him, he's definitely mature beyond his years. And again, if you're going to play quarterback in the SEC, you need to be smart. You need to be able to have that kind of, recount or being able to recall those kind of things. And obviously, a lot, like Chris said, there's a hesitancy to want to put too much in eggs in the basket of saying, man, this guy's going to be great. But again, everything that we've heard up to this point gives us a lot of belief. He's just got to go out there on the field and prove it here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I think guys, it's kind of fascinating, and I think it's actually probably one of the reasons I've always followed and loved recruiting. Just following a guy as a high school player and then watching them develop into a college player, sometimes a college star, then sometimes an NFL star. But when does a guy go from just kind of being on a roster to being a superstar? You know what I'm saying? Like every guy that's ever become like a superstar at like the conference or national level sort of has that coming out party where everybody else starts to take notice. The interesting thing, if you want to look at it in stages, we're firmly in the local stage where here locally, like if you want to buy stock in the idea of Lenora Sellers being a future superstar in this league, there's still time to get in on that. Now, Chris, as we know, there have been guys, and this is probably for every school, where you hear buzz about them and you hear all these things about practice, and then for whatever reason, it either does not pan out or it just takes a little bit longer than maybe you anticipated. So I think we're in the stage of figuring out what is fair, because I think if somebody says, let's pump the brakes a little bit, that to me is not a negative. That's not a shot at Lenora Sellers. That's, let's be fair.
Yeah.
To put the right expectations on. We had this conversation how many times about Nick Harbor last offseason? And it wasn't, hey, Nick Harbor isn't very good. It was, hey, let's be fair to Nick Harbor. He is going to have to develop at wide receiver. He's got a just freakish amount of potential. But let's be fair to him. And then what happens, Chris? Inevitably, people are going, why isn't Nick Harbor on the field game one? This is a little bit different, but I do think you have to be fair to the guy. Would it be shocking at all if, hey, you're playing the toughest position in football, maybe the toughest position in sports? That's probably another conversation. Would it be shocking if he kind of eased in and like showed some flashes, but had some rookie mistakes and then it was a slow build up? No, of course not. Would it be shocking, especially playing an out-of-conference opponent at home, would it be shocking if he went out there and threw for 250 and rushed for another 100 and just took over game one? I don't think any of us will be looking around like that's a surprise at this point,
Yeah,
you know?
couldn't have seen that coming. Yeah, I mean, some of the best quarterbacks in college football history, like guys who are just insanely good, Heisman Trophy winners, like those guys didn't always come out freshman year, game one.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm sure there is one out there, but off the top, like Cam Newton was a different situation because he was at Florida, left Florida, went to junior college, was immediately a star there, and then pretty much immediately was a star at Auburn. But it's not like he was a first-year college football player. He also at Florida backed up Tim Tebow, who was fairly good.
Yeah, and Florida let him get away.
Florida let him get away. Yeah, he got in some trouble, but Florida let him get away, and he's backing up Tebow. Now, Tebow, right, didn't immediately come in. He was
Chris
a backup.
Leak.
Chris Leak was the guy.
He was a situational guy.
Charlotte's
Situational
finest.
guy. Then look at Johnny Manziel, literally redshirted year one. One of the most dynamic quarterbacks we've ever seen in the history of the game. Trevor Lawrence at Clemson. Everybody knew, like it was with Trevor, you're like, this guy's going to be an absolute stud. But when he came in, Clemson had a starting quarterback, and it was a kind of a deal where we're going to start Kelly Bryant, let Trevor play some, and eventually, pretty quickly.
Yeah, by the end of that year.
By then, he very quickly took over. But the point is, he didn't come in and boom, immediately he's a starter. Now with Lenoris, little different because, different situation than Clemson or Florida with Chris Leak. Like you don't, like if Spencer Rattler were back, Lenoris would not be starting over Spencer Rattler. But you have some openness, and we're going to see Lenora Sellers as the starter in the first game. But I think everything you just said, Wes, still applies. Like you do have to wait, and we'll see how it goes in game one, first snap.
And all those guys, most of those being Heisman Trophy winners. Not saying that he's going to win the Heisman Trophy. That'd be great if he did, but they all had that defining breakout game sometime early on in their career. And when you look at this schedule for South Carolina, it doesn't necessarily even have to be a game that South Carolina wins. Let's say if you go on the road to Alabama and he goes out there, has a fantastic performance and has South Carolina in the game late in the fourth quarter, and maybe you come up short by a field goal or a touchdown or something like that, that can still be kind of that national coming out party for a guy like him, where suddenly people outside of this bubble take notice, like, hey, this guy might be somebody to keep an eye on going forward.
Not that South Carolina, Kentucky is a game that your just average college football fan tunes in for, but how important is that game for South Carolina? We've talked about that pretty much all offseason. Phil Still, who we talked about the magazine a ton yesterday, they have South Carolina, Kentucky finishing tied in the SEC. So we talked about the FPI. That basically they have the two teams identical going into this year. So to me, that's your first opportunity. Not that, again, it's going to lead Sports Center or whatever, but if he has a huge game and leads South Carolina to a win, and you're on the road, it's an early potential 2-0 start with LSU very next week.
Yep,
at noon for some reason. Yeah. But I digress. So there's early opportunities here.
Well, and it's your first game against a comparable opponent. And no disrespect to Old Dominion, that is a game that Carolina should win. That is a game that, like you said, if the Sailors went out there and threw for 250 and 100, ran for 100 yards, that'd be great, obviously, but it still doesn't tell us everything we need to know about them. You have a Kentucky team that you're pretty similar to, or if he goes out there and has a similar type of performance, like, okay, now we're getting somewhere.
Well, and you have two schools breaking in new quarterbacks as well. So how much of a kind of filling out process is there for both of those quarterbacks now? Of course, with Kentucky, one of them's a transfer. With South Carolina, you're talking about a redshirt freshman who will be starting. We're all assuming the second game of his career. So, it's fascinating. By the way, Tyler, from now on, I would think you should start saying all disrespect intended. Old Dominion.
Every ounce of disrespect towards the Monarchs, I will be disrespecting them for the next 51 days. And
51 days.
51 days.
Let's go.
However many amount of fans there are in the Old Dominion fan base, they can come after me if they want to. I don't care.
Yeah.
I've been trying to find us an Old Dominion guest, and I was like, man, again, no disrespect.
All disrespect.
Hard to find. We don't have an On3 Old Dominion site. You got ideas, Tyler?
We actually had a guy from the Virginian Colonial on the halftime show the other week, so maybe we'll hit him up again.
A
little bit closer to kickoff.
My idea was just to have the head coach, Ricky Rain, on.
Sure.
Ricky Rain, that sounds like a made-up NCAA football video game name, I feel like.
Sounds like a race car driver to me. What do you think, Tyler?
Actually, yeah, that would work.
Ricky Rain. But
Is there a Ricky Rain?
There's not.
Should be.
I think it's Rain, Rahne. He was at Penn State.
Sounds a little more professional wrestling to me, actually. Ricky raining down the pain. Express. You know what I mean?
Yes. We'll try to get Ricky Rain on. Seriously, why not? The worst they can say is no.
Well, we'll loop back around to the Luke Doty conversation from the Garnet Trust Hour, because he also talked a little bit about the offensive line, too. We'll dive into that coming up. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Thursday here on the game.
All right, guys, I want to tell you all about our friends over at Firehouse Subs. If you are getting hungry like I am, it is an amazing option for lunch. So many different things you can get at Firehouse Subs. Cold subs, hot subs, some of your favorites like the Italian, the meatball, the club on a sub, the hero, turkey bacon ranch. I could really name all of them. Pretty much got the menu memorized at this point. You can also check out one of their limited time offerings, the barbecue Cuban sub, Southern Roots with a Cuban twist. It is still available. All those are available at 14 Midlands Firehouse Subs locations. So no matter where you are in the Midlands, you are always close to a Firehouse Subs location. Check out our favorite way to order by going to firehousesubs.com or downloading the Firehouse Subs app. It's free to register an account. That way you can use the Rapid Rescue to go to avoid the wait and order online. When you walk into the store, it'll be ready to go for you, and you can earn some rewards. Firehousesubs.com or the Firehouse Subs app.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Here on the game, Towerhead West Metro Chris Clark. Coming up next week, Monday through Thursday, we're going to have Jay, Elijah, and Terry all out at SEC Media Days in Dallas, giving us live coverage all day long. We'll be checking in with them throughout the morning each day, again, running through Thursday. Of course, Shane Beamer and the player representatives will be speaking on Monday, one of those being Luke Doty, who, again, was our guest in the Garnet Trust Hour and the last hour there. And given the fact that he'll be the one offensive play representative there, I imagine he'll be answering some questions about South Carolina's offensive line, which, of course, was a big concern from a season ago. He also, Wes, touched on that a little bit in the last hour as well.
Yeah, I thought it was fascinating that, we've heard about this O-line putting in extra work, and there was that note in, I guess that would have been May, about, hey, this is a month where you can go home and reset if you want. And in a lot of ways, it's actually surprisingly encouraged, I feel like. And this O-line, those guys got their little reset time as well, but they really used that month to try to get a step ahead. And, I thought Doty saying, for one, you could just hear there's a lot of confidence from him as a leader and a guy who's seen it all at this point in that group. And basically, I'm paraphrasing him, not trying to put words in his mouth, was basically saying, like, look, our offense is going to go as far as they can take us. And, Chris, I thought, him basically saying that's the hardest working group on the team this summer is that's a good sign, and it speaks to something Beamer told us, and that was that, there are some veterans in that room that have kind of taken it personally, it seems, and have taken ownership. I think that was Vershawn and Ja'Kai Moore, who Beamer kind of singled out at one of those welcome home stops as taking ownership. Luke threw Torticelli Simpkins III in there as well as being a leader in there. He didn't add the third. I added that part.
I did too. That's why I laughed.
But you get what I'm getting at here. Like, those guys, and Luke was even like, look, they've taken a lot of, Luke's exact quote was, they've taken a lot of crap. And, I think for that group, they seem to want to do everything they can to prove everyone wrong.
Yeah, Case and Henry talked about this a lot the other day, just as far as like the mindset and what they've been doing in workouts. And they are doing some things, you get the sense differently. And I think part of that is just the stuff you were talking about, like the offensive line taking a little bit more ownership of we've got to get this thing turned around. But then you look at kind of as a team and how Luke Day, the strength and conditioning coach at Carolina, has structured this offseason. There's no doubt that they took a deep dive in the offseason and said, what can we do differently? So some of the changes that were made were like technical things in the weight room. Kaysen said, hey, we're doing more Olympic lifts. We're doing more deep squats. We're doing more, cleans. But Kaysen pointed out, when you're pass setting against a guy, that's a clean, basically. And so they're doing a lot of lifts that directly translate to football. And that doesn't mean, by the way, don't say, well, wow, they weren't lifting at all. Like, I'm not saying that the past couple off seasons, but they have added more of those type things in and kind of changed the program around. They've also started working out in the past. They worked out skill guys in one group, what they call mids in another group, which is like your linebacker, edge, those type guys. And then you would have the big guys, offensive and defensive linemen. And they changed that this offseason to where it's offense works out together, defense works out together. And a lot of the guys feel like that's helped to create some continuity. Now, of course, in the past, the offensive line would have worked out together anyway because those are big guys and they're going to work out together. But I think there's just been some interesting tweaks this offseason that may help with some of the areas that they struggled in last year. But I think another thing is if you just look at the personnel, you've added in 3 transfers who have been in college programs for a while, and 2 of those 3 have played a lot of football. You add in some talented freshmen, especially like Josiah Thompson. He's pushing. You've got some guys that are a year older. You're healthier. You've got a mobile quarterback. Like, if you kind of look at it, you maybe don't have to stretch to say, okay, we know this group almost by default. And because of the low bar that you have to clear to get better based relative to last year, they'll be better. I think the question is, how much better can they be? And they will need to be, in my opinion, a good bit better for this team to be able to reach its potential.
And again, health is going to be the most paramount thing because that's what plagued the entire position group a season ago. But I'm looking at, Yuva put up his projected two deep a couple days ago on what the offensive line is theoretically looking like at this point in time. When you're looking from left to right at Tree, Bell, Lee, Baugh, and Henry being your starting five, if it ends up holding true, that being the case, you have that mix of, okay, Lee, obviously somebody that's been around for a while. Bell's played a lot of different places, just a ton of experience under his belt. You have the two guys now going in their sophomore year in Tree and Ball that got a ton of experience season ago, and a guy in Case and Henry who, unfortunately, we have not seen be able to play to his full potential because he's been hurt so much. Like, you like what you get if that ends up being your starting five on the offensive line for the most part.
Yeah, and that could be the five. I think there's going to be potentially quite a bit of movement between now and then. It may land on that five eventually, but I was reminded this summer, hey, Wes, we were very high on Case and Henry, and don't forget about him. He Chris, I feel like has kind of quietly locked himself into that starting right tackle spot, yet it is not talked about as much as maybe some of those other guys. And the other thing Kaysen brings is this dude is a fiery leader. Like, he brings some energy to that position, which I think you always need. Some of those other spots, though, Josiah, I mean, let's call it for what it is. Like, this dude ultimately is going to be, I think, South Carolina's starting left tackle. Is that this year? Is that next year? Is that day one? Is that game 6? Who knows? But then what does that mean for Tree? That slides Tree potentially over into a guard spot. So now you have increased competition there. We talked about Torricelli Simpkins. I was told, hey, that guy's going to be hard to keep off the field. So the good thing is you actually guys are probably going to have a couple of upset players. And what I mean by that is there are going to be a couple of guys who are pretty talented that aren't going to be in that starting five. And that's what you want, right? Like, you have to have that 8 because we know that's such a physical position. You're going to have guys get banged up at various points during the season, so you better have that. We talked about it all, transfer portal season. South Carolina seems just bound and determined to not let what happened last year happen this year. And so it's got to play out. Again, much like we were talking about with Lenoris, it's got to play out on the field. On paper, there are signs of an improved group up front this season.
Right. And again, as long as they can stay healthy, hopefully we take a step back in the right direction because that's going to be important for the entire offense to function better than they did a season ago. Dive into recruiting coming up next. A big commitment getting set to making a decision later on today in South Carolina is in the running. That's coming up. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game.
All right, folks, our friends over at Classic Roofing, Joe Reeder, Max Sawyer, two buddies of mine, they want to take care of all of your roofing needs, whether that's residential or commercial roofing. They're going to serve Columbia, South Carolina, and the surrounding areas with great customer service. They both live here in the Palmetto State. Their families live here, and they want to take care of you. Like I said, call them right now, 803-590-7870, classicroofingsc.com as well. You get more information on their services or set up a free estimate. As you know, it is summertime, which means, as we talked about earlier, hot weather, and it means storms as well. When these storms roll in, if you have roof damage, some people may say, hey, just file a claim, let your insurance handle it. That may not be your best course of action long term. Let them come out, let them take a look, and let them give you an honest assessment, just like they did for me. Call them today, 803-590-7870, or learn more at classicroofingsc.com.
Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, and Chris Clark along with you on this Thursday. Of course, creeping closer and closer to the start of the 2024 college football season. Talk plenty of recruiting. This summer, South Carolina looks to continue to grow its 2025 class. Pretty big get South Carolina is attempting to get later on today, 3 o'clock. Lex Cyrus, 4-star wide receiver out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce his high school's name because that looks too complicated. But he's got South Carolina in his final two. It's between that and in-state school, Penn State, later on this afternoon. Again, that decision coming. And Carolina not the favorite here, but still has a chance.
Could be.
Maybe not. Maybe.
I think Tyler was going off of
is
the
there smoke coming?
On-3 recruiting prediction machine.
Some guys beat the RPM, though.
I was going to say, I thought the RPM was the most reliable thing. That's what I'm going off of here.
I would hope that Chris and I would be sitting here as the most reliable
well, in a
source of information.
In a general sense.
Yeah, you're
That's
going
what I
with
mean.
artificial intelligence.
Yes, I am.
Tyler. First of all, Lex Cyrus, great football name. Love that.
Yeah, I agree.
Chris, what you think here, man? Could the Gamecocks get a? I think it would be safe to say a come from behind win here potentially. I remember going into the OV, which is kind of interesting. He ended up only taking officials to Penn State and South Carolina.
Yeah, that was it.
And was considered a Penn State lock or borderline lock, and but wanted to check out the Gamecocks. And we got that initial. Remember when we started hearing? I think it was maybe a couple of days after the OV, and we were like, "Man, it sounds like that went really well." But is it enough? Because Penn State is in state for him, and slowly, the thought has been like this thing is tight.
Yeah, I remember right after that official visit weekend. So Penn State got the first official May 31st weekend. South Carolina was the next weekend. That was, like you said, Wes, that was really it. And those are the final two schools, by the way. There's not going to be 4 or 5 hats on the table or what, if he even puts hats on the table at 3 p.m. Eastern for the announcement. There's those two. And that's really been pretty consistent. He only got offered by South Carolina back in January. That was when James Coley was still on staff. And then Carolina kept prioritizing him. You look at it. You remember there was a time period where we were like, is he even going to make that official visit? It was kind of up in the air. Got it locked back in, makes the visit. Right in the aftermath, we're like, we heard it went well, but you still probably think it's going to be Penn State. And I remember maybe like a week after the visit wrapped, I started hearing there's a good chance he may come. Apparently, really liked the visit. There was a thought that he may want to get out of state. Maybe wants to be one of those kids who wants to leave his home state. And as this thing has progressed, I do think it's still, here 4 hours before the decision. I think it's still a little up in the air because I think he has kept things kind of quiet. But there have been, I will say, some encouraging signs, put it that way, for the Gamecocks. So this would be a really nice pickup. This is a kid who, is a 4-star prospect. He's ranked by the On3 industry ranking, the weighted average of all 4 services, number 219 nationally overall. He's not the biggest guy. He's 5'10", 175, but he's 10'4" in the 100 meters, so he can really run. And then if you watch him on film, he's not just a guy who just goes out there and runs go routes and runs past people. Like, he's an actual receiver as well that has some speed.
Yeah, I think when you talk about receivers and a side effect here, or there's maybe a Venn diagram here of overlapping people in the 3-star mafia who also...
The dang 3-star mafia.
The dang 3-star mafia. If anybody is 5'10" at wide receiver, they're not big enough now. This dude can run.
Yeah.
Like, give me, I'm not saying you want all 5'9", 5'10s out there, but if we're going 5'10", a guy that can run and apparently has worked really, really hard. I was reading some quotes from his coach. Worked really, really hard to go from being not a track guy playing football, but to be a football player who can run. And so, I think for South Carolina, you have the potential now. You start talking about him. You start talking about the potential of like a Malik Clark here in state. That would be a nice little duo there for Carolina in this class at high school recruiting at that position, which we know. Beamer talked about it. He said, hey, we need to recruit better in high school as far as the receiver position goes. So this will be a nice steal at the end for South Carolina. And, there's still 3 hours plus until the announcement, but we'll have some coverage on Gamecock Central. And if I was a Gamecock fan, I'm firmly paying attention to this one now.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with a 5'10" receiver. That's somebody you can obviously use in the slot in a variety of ways, and that's what a lot of the veteran guys in South Carolina's wide receiver room this year are around that size. When you're talking about Huggins, Bruce, and Gage Larverdane, who again are only going to have the 1 year here at South Carolina to do whatever they're going to do, and you're going to kind of need to supplement whatever you're losing with them with maybe somebody of a similar size like Lex Cyrus.
Yeah, you can be 5'10", and there's been a bunch of receivers in Carolina's history who've been around that size who've been really, really good. What you don't want to be is you don't want to be small, unskilled, can't run. Like then it's a problem, right?
Right.
If you are that size, you need to be skilled. You need to be able to understand how to get open, et cetera, et cetera. There are plenty of guys, plenty of examples, not just here at South Carolina, current, past, but across the game. College football, across the game in the NFL, of guys that are that size profile who are really good. I think when you look at Lex, I don't think you penalize him at all for being 5'10", because again, he can run. I don't think you want to take a class full of guys like that unless they're all just special. I think you want to have a mix. And if South Carolina's class, I'll say this, if it finishes out how it could at receiver, the potential that they have, then you'd be looking at not only adding Lex, but adding a guy who is one of those bigger receivers in Malik Clark from Rock Hill. That's their ideal finish. That's kind of their two top remaining targets there.
Yeah, and I think, and the reason I bring that up is just, you want to talk about narratives. Like, I feel like when a narrative sort of gets rolling, people just grab onto it locally. And so that's been the narrative. And we've reported ourselves, like when they hit the portal during this most recent window, it was they want to get bigger at wide receiver. And that's true. And yeah, that's all. You want to have a balance of guys. But if you can run and you can get open, 5'10" is, there's nothing wrong with that. And this kid can fly. So, again, you want to talk about possibly adding that duo to your roster. That would be a big step, and really for a guy, let's be honest, I'm sure an adjustment for Mike Fury kind of being thrown into some big boy recruiting battles. If he can add those two names by his name as far as commitments, then that would be some really nice early momentum for his tenure as South Carolina's receivers coach.
Hit a couple more recruiting notes as we wrap up today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. Presented by Firehouse Subs, up next on your Thursday here on The Game. Welcome back in Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on the game. Tyler Head, Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark along with you for a few more minutes here. Talking recruiting, one of the potential recruits that South Carolina has their eye on, waiting for his commitment a little bit later down the road, is four-star defensive back Kendall Daniels, though it seems like, and Chris was reporting this on Gamecock Central, that Virginia Tech is making a very strong push for him, again, as we wait to see when his announcement's going to come.
Chris, doesn't it feel like at the end of these things, man, there's always that just push? Like, sometimes it's kind of a layup. Like, let's say Tayshawn Austin. I didn't really feel like anybody else really, when we heard, hey, it's probably going to be South Carolina, nobody else really was able to gain much traction down the stretch. But then a lot of these, whoever is maybe running second or kind of the co-favorite, everybody's making that final push. So it does typically, when it becomes decision time, which with Kendall Daniels, he doesn't have an exact date, but he told us soon, which, sorry, Kendall, I think soon has passed.
Expired.
But, yeah, it's expired twice, actually. But Kendall, an awesome kid, by the way, and great player, too. I think that this is typical. Sometimes there's something to it. We saw several guys last year in the summer where we felt like South Carolina was in good shape, and then a school push, Jonathan Paylor comes to mind, the receiver out of North Carolina. But, Chris, I think your last reporting, you're kind of back to feeling maybe a little bit better about where Carolina is here.
Yeah, I think so. There are a couple different points where you go, okay, South Carolina seems to be in good shape really since the spring, like the weekend of the spring game.
Mm-hmm.
But I think a couple things happen, a few things happen really. Number one, you don't get an announcement. So that leaves you wondering, well, what's with the delay here? Clemson offers, he went up there, has a teammate going to Clemson in this class. Clemson offers, and you go, okay, well, is that going to mean anything? Kid tweets it out, seems excited, et cetera. And then, still no announcement in favor of South Carolina, and you hear the stuff about Virginia Tech. But did pick up some info this week that, there's still not only communication between Daniels and the South Carolina staff, but good communication. Seems pretty positive. And I think I am back to feeling, say better about it, more positive about South Carolina's chances. But also, I think you got to recognize, okay, there is still a delay, so kind of what's going on here? When will he announce? Like you said, Wes, soon has passed for sure. But that doesn't mean South Carolina won't land him. And look, this would be, we know Virginia's been a really nice area for South Carolina on the recruiting trail. It's a kid who's got really good size, 6'3", 195. Gamecocks have been on him for quite a while. Former high school teammate of J.R. Johnson, who's a freshman linebacker with the Gamecocks. Highly recruited guy who's really talented. And, he's one of several guys that I don't know for sure that Kendall Daniels will make a decision in July. It kind of seems like it, but I would have thought he would have made a decision by now regardless. There are several guys. This matches up with what Shane Beamer has said earlier this year. Several guys who project to announce before their senior seasons, and Daniels is one of them. So it's a big month.
And fits the mold we have seen from Torian Gray, kind of to a T. And, I think he's maybe listed 6'3" some places, but is actually, I think, closing in on 6'4" now, has kind of grown a little bit. And, you look at, obviously, Nicky Mawari is maybe your best example, but Jalen Kilgore as well. These kind of lengthy safety types. We even see that at the cornerback spot to an extent, but likes that size, likes that length, likes the long arms, and Kendall Daniels fits that. I mean, if you're a Gamecock fan and you want to dream, your hope is that you could maybe kind of team him up with a Lagonza Hayward, who you're battling, I would say, Final Two there as well, South Carolina, Tennessee. You're in a big boy battle there, but if you could close out kind of that safety recruiting in this class with both of those guys, you're feeling really good about things.
Yeah, it looks like Hayward, Georgia's name has continued to be included there. I'm just not really convinced that Georgia is all that in it. Like he visited there this summer, or was it the spring?
Summer, I think.
Summer, yeah. But it does seem
All run
like
together.
Yeah, it does. It does seem like Tennessee was the public leader for a while for Lagonza Hayward, but then he visited South Carolina officially. That seemed to go very well. Everything we heard pointed to the Gamecocks being the favorite, but then he took 2 more officials to Florida, to Tennessee. And so I would say it's a little bit more up in the air. I think some people who have been a little bit worried about the recruiting class have said, well, he didn't commit. He went to Tennessee. Obviously, he's not coming to South Carolina. I don't think that's where things are at. I think there's still not like a firmness to what he may do. But he's still going to decide at the end of the month. South Carolina does still have a recruiting event at the end of the month that he's supposed to come to. We'll see if that happens. I think that'll be a key. And I know there's still been communication there between Hayward and South Carolina. So you look at the prospect of landing those 2, like you said, Wes, that's a couple 4-star safeties with size and talent.
And don't you feel like that is kind of one where we're going to be tracking that down to the tracking it right down to the decision day? Like, it's bounced around enough in terms of favorites. I mean, after the official visits even, there was reporting pretty much that each school, because, Florida was in there too getting an OV. There was reporting that, each school was in the lead after each official visit among the 4 schools. So this thing still could shift. It could even shift several times between now and then. But Gamecocks certainly in this one, it seems like.
Well, and hopefully that will sway people's confidence in this 2025 class a little bit more than it has been as of late. The dang 3-star mafia, as we like to call them, hasn't been as pleased as they've been in years past. And hopefully with some of these guys that, again, South Carolina's in the running for, including like Cyrus today, maybe that can start to trend people back in the right direction a little bit.
Yep, let's all tune in at 3 o'clock. We'll have a complete breakdown of that after the fact if it ends up being South Carolina. And I believe I was just seeing, Chris, that On 3 is also going to have a live stream.
I posted that link on the Insiders Forum.
Gamecock Central.
Yeah.
So
Nobody wanted to drive to Harrisburg?
I'm sure it's a beautiful part of the country.
We may have a correspondent up there, Tyler.
Okay. That's a good sign then, right?
An On 3 correspondent.
Okay.
Covering for both sides.
Okay. A little different, but still.
Yeah, but still, it makes sense. If you have a correspondent who is 6 miles from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania,
that helps out.
That's I don't know how far we are in terms of miles.
A little better than
but
making Jack drive 12 hours up there or something like that.
Hey, Chris and I have done those drives.
We've done those drives.
We've put our time in, we'll say.
That'll do it for today's edition of the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Coming next halftime show with myself and Dimitri Ravenos on your Thursday here on The Game.